Broadcasting worldwide from a studio inside global headquarters of RP Enterprises in Kansas City.
Hey, gang! Ladies and gentlemen, Papa's home!
This is the Papa Ron Podcast.
Biotransfer in progress.
With Ronnie Philips and Jillian Gregg.
Showtime.
Mic check, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, check. I'm just trying to remember if I remember how to do this. It's been so long since we've been doing a Papa Ron podcast, but we're back. Welcome, Jillian. How are you?
I'm good. These headphones feel good.
Do they?
Yeah, it feels like home.
Do we sound good? Because we're having some technical difficulties getting started, and I'm still kind of hearing that little...
I know. You're like
it's driving me
growling
nuts.
in my ear. Headphones feel good, but your voice feels a little growly.
Yeah. So there's a possibility that we could have some subpar audio quality on this particular podcast, and I apologize in advance as we were doing mic checks prior to hitting record and things didn't sound perfect, but we are going to make the best of it for this particular episode, which is episode 39 in a brand new season of the Papa Ron podcast. I'm calling it a new season because it's a new year. And right. So we started the first season with Kara Payton. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, go check it out. I guess if you're listening to this, then you can just, after you get done here, scroll back an episode and you can check it out. But she was fantastic. This week's episode is a guy that I've got a lot of respect for, and he's got a tremendous story. And I will just kind of set this up by telling you that you might have heard us refer to this guy when we were talking to Nate Bukaty a few episodes back, which you should probably go back and listen to that episode as well. It's really good. And this particular person that we have on today worked with Nate Bukaty and Stephen St. John over at Sports Radio 810 WHD-HB for many years as the morning show producer on the Border Patrol, and then decided that he was going to spread his wings and fly. And fly he did. Welcome to episode 39 of the Papa Ron podcast. Old friend Jake is it Gutierrez or Guiterrez? Or does it matter? Potato.
Yeah, I've been called a lot worse. So whatever you want to go with. It's I was raised Guiterrez, but it's just a matter of pronunciation. So Gutierrez, Guiterrez, I've been called it all, and I will answer to all that.
I wasn't going to talk about this, and I told myself I wasn't going to talk about this, but I was recently on a. But here I am.
Right off the bat.
You broke that promise,
right? The reason I say that it was because I recently served on a jury. I told you about this, right?
Yes.
I recently served on a jury, and I don't want to get into a whole lot of details about it, but there was a subject, or the how do I say this without saying too much? The person, the victim, we'll say that the victim's last name was pronounced Guiterrez,
right? Okay.
By the people that were in, the lawyers that were doing the case and everything. Court. They always referred to him as Gutierrez, spelled exactly the same as yours, which I've always called you Jake Guiterrez.
Right.
But then because of a week long of that trial and hearing it Gutierrez, I just got programmed to say it a different way. I digress. What's life been like since leaving sports radio, man?
It's been great. I'm right now. It's I have one employer. It's the big man upstairs.
Love to hear that.
So that's a freeing feeling. But I was out in Colorado for a bit. When I left WHB, I moved out to Colorado, and I was out there till the end of last year, and would have stayed out there longer, except I couldn't find a place to live. In the area that I wanted to be in, there was just no inventory for long-term rentals. I was in a place called Buena Vista, Colorado. It's about 2 hours west of Colorado Springs, and they're having a big issue in that county with people turning their long-term rentals into Airbnbs and VRBOs. So bad that they're having trouble finding housing for teachers and municipalities, and they're trying to regulate it within the county. And I know Denver and Colorado Springs kind of gets a slant towards their very liberal areas. You go west of there, it's very conservative. People do not want you in their business.
Okay.
And so they're having trouble telling people what to do and regulate that within that area. Long story short, I wanted to come back home because I looked at Colorado Springs, but it's like, if I'm going to live in a big city, I might as well be home.
Sure.
Cost of living in Kansas City, you can't beat it. And
right.
It's home.
Yeah.
So I just took it as that's God's way of saying, come on back home, Jake.
Yeah.
So here I am.
Before, obviously, we have you here for a reason. You're an author, and you got a book out, or it's coming out. It's not out yet, right?
It's not out yet.
Okay, so we're going to dive into all of that in a little bit, but I'm kind of curious because we've never talked about it. The people that might be listening to this locally from the Kansas City Metro might know you from being on 810 for so many years.
Almost 20.
Yeah.
Wow.
How did you ever get into radio, and how did it work that you got in with Steven and Nate?
So funny story. So I went to Western Illinois University, and I played soccer up there for 4 years.
You were a goalie, right?
Yeah, correct. And so I went to St. Thomas Aquinas, parlayed that into a full ride tuition scholarship to Western Illinois. It's a small D1 school in Macomb, Illinois. Played soccer there for 4 years. And then I came back and, I went to school there. I had my scholarship threatened because I changed my major so many times.
Oh, wow.
I just didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And so according to the NCAA, you have to have a certain percentage of your major done by your second semester, your junior year.
Okay.
And so I'm going into my the fall semester of my junior year, and I just changed my major for like the fifth time. And I didn't, I went from horticulture to parks and tourism to, mechanical engineering. I think I was in like hospitality for a brief moment.
Why did you switch so much?
I'll be honest, like school's not for me.
Okay.
It just wasn't for me. Like, I was diagnosed with ADD 3 different times at a young age. My mom refused to let them put me on any type of meds.
Okay.
Which I'm so grateful for today.
Sure.
Because it's like a superpower now.
Yeah.
and so being able to live with it.
Right.
And so it's like, I learned that, and I think my parents knew this, that like, if I was interested, I excelled at it. If I wasn't interested, like, no thanks, is a struggle. And so that's just kind of how I was wired. So finally, my mom like sat me down. She's like, what do you like, Jake? Like, let's figure this out. Like, you have your school paid for, and that's something that, we don't want to, I don't think she was thinking we don't want to pay for your schooling, but it's like, why lose that?
Yeah, right.
Plus, I love that. I love my coach and my soccer team. It's like, so she's like, what do you love? And
apparently everything.
Yeah. You're like, I like a variety,
as long
Mom.
as it wasn't in a classroom,
Right? Baskin Robbins.
So just to rewind back a little bit, like, so my grandfather started a Mexican wholesale food company here in town called Arts Mexican Products.
Okay.
And then my dad took it over. And so during the summers and even in high school, I would do deliveries for them at restaurants and grocery stores around town. And I was always listening to talk radio, And so my mom's like, what do you like? And I'm like, I like talk radio. She's like, then go do that.
Okay. Did they offer that there?
Like, ding. And so they had so I did communications with a minor in broadcasting.
Okay.
And and I got to do some like student radio stuff. And it's like, it just clicked at that point. Right.
Okay.
And so I come back to Kansas City after I left Western Illinois. And I went to work for my dad, but I was looking for a job in the media around town. And so I just started hammering Steven St. John with emails, like literally every day. Like I think like 40 straight days.
Was this before? So was he doing mornings on 810, or is this going back to the days of him and Randy Miller? And
this would have been the summer of 02.
Okay.
Right. So I finished, come back.
That was before I came to Kansas City.
So I started, I went to work for my dad just to make some money on the side and until I found what I wanted to do. And so I would go in to do deliveries for my dad every morning. And this is back in like the days of AOL.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I'd log, you got mail. I'd log in and I'd send Steven St. John an email before I went out and do deliveries. I did that for like 40 straight days.
Why him? Or was there other people that you sent emails to?
No, I mean, I think just because I felt like I wanted to work with him, like, cause he had, my father's first generation Mexican.
Okay.
I'm Mexican. I just really, his story was, he was a caller on, in the night show, then got his own show. And, and so I kind of just,
But you heard him, or you got the introduction from him for listening to him on 810.
He was hosting the morning show with Jason Whitlock. So it was Whitlock's neighborhood, and he was Whitlock's co-host. So this was '02. This is August of '02.
I was going to say, and the reason I was bringing up me having come to Kansas City, because I quickly became introduced to 810. And at the time that I moved to Kansas City to work at Q104, The Freak was on the morning show.
That's the first show I produced.
Okay, so this would have been before The Freak arrived then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I started an internship with St. John.
Okay.
August of '02.
Okay.
He finally answered an email after 40 straight days of emailing. He finally was like, "Hey, look, dude, stop emailing me." He's like, "We don't have a whole lot of interns because it's so early. So we'll get people coming in and then they'll just stop coming in." Mm-hmm. He's like, "So come in next week, see if this is for you." And so I started showing up, and it's funny because it was kind of an unsanctioned internship.
I was going to ask you if you were done with college, it wasn't, it wasn't really going towards anything. It was, you were free labor, right?
Yes. Well,
same here.
Turns out that that's frowned upon. WHB doesn't have a huge HR department, but they had one person who, at the time, I kind of kept to myself and just kind of did whatever Steven and Jason wanted me to do.
Right.
And just came in the mornings. Yeah. Oh, I mean, that was I was in there 3 days a week at 5 in the morning. And so it was my foot in the door. And I have nothing but good things to say about Jason Whitlock. He was great to me.
Good. I was going to ask that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I could tell you stories where he was above and beyond cool to me. But, so I start doing this internship and it gets to be like November, December. And the lady from HR came in and she's like, "Who are you?" Right? And I'm like, "I'm an intern on Jason and Steven's show." And she's like, You're not an intern here. I have the list of interns and you're not here. Mm-hmm. And so, I went to, I think Steven or Jason, they're like, "Just ignore it. Just keep showing up." And then a week later, she comes and she's like, I'm going to have to call the authorities to have you removed if you keep showing up here.
What?
Yeah. So I'm spitballing with my parents. I'm in the dumps. This is I'm going to lose my internship.
Why would they not go to bat for you? Why would they not going to them and saying, "Hey, we told him to come"?
Because legally you have to be doing it for college credit.
There did come a time.
Free labor laws.
There did come a time where that did start getting more regulated.
Yeah. I mean, so there is I can't they either had to hire me on or they're breaking the law for free labor laws.
Right.
I'm tracking out.
So
and they didn't want to get in trouble.
Right. And then so what I did is I went over to Johnson County Community College and went to the head of the communications broadcasting department. And I said, "I have an internship at WHB. I need the paperwork." And he was like, "What?" He's like, "That's not how it works." I'm like, "No, I have the internship. I just need the paperwork." He's like, "No, we assign internships." And how do you have an internship at WHB? I've been trying to get an intern in there for years.
I love it.
And I said, "Give me the paperwork," and you got one. And so, his name was Mark Radaziner. He gave me the paperwork, and I signed up for the internship at Johnson County.
Yeah.
Through there. So I was getting 3 college credits, or whatever.
Wow.
And so it was funny because then a week or two later, because it was right before Christmas, right? So after Christmas, the next semester started. And that's when my internship started. So the lady, I had the paperwork sitting in my pocket, and I knew this as soon as and I didn't go straight to the lady to be like, "Here, I got this done."
Waiting,
I was like, she gave me such a hard time. It's like, and I'm 22 years old at the time. I'm very, I'm a different person today to say that, but I was a little more shallow and kind of up, anyways. Yeah. So she comes and she said, "Okay, I warned you. I'm calling the authorities." And I just pulled that paper and I slapped it on the desk. I said, "Here's my internship." And she looked at it and super defeated and just, I didn't have very much interaction with that lady she wasn't there for very long.
I was going to say, you never got to be good friends with her and be like, "Remember the time when I first started working here?"
I think, it's a little inside baseball, but some people who work at WHB still, she was not there very long because of a couple emails she sent out as the HR director that were not very HR.
Okay.
So we'll leave it at that. Mm-hmm. So then I started my real internship through Johnson County. And then that whole time, Steven had just gone over to the FM station because we had gotten the rights to the Royals that year.
Yep.
So he went to 97.3 The Planet.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
And did the morning show there with Randy Miller.
Yep.
And so it was just Jason doing the show. And so I was interning for Jason. And then also I was doing work for David Borchert, who was producing Crunch Time, which was Bill Moss and Tim Grunhard and Frank Bull.
Yeah.
So I was doing both those shows for my internship. And then that's when the mass exodus happened in March or April of 2002.
Okay.
And that's when Whitlock went over to 610, and that's when Moss and Grunhard went over there. And I was in the middle of that internship, and then that's when they brought John Renshaw in to fill in for Whitlock.
Oh.
And so I finished out my
Renshaw's the freak, by the way.
Yeah, the freak. He did a show called The Freak Show. His name was John Renshaw.
Makes sense. Okay.
He was a national guy doing national radio, and 810 brought him in.
Okay.
And so I finished out my internship with him, and we got along so well that, he went to bat for me to get hired on. And so,
as the producer?
Yeah. And so I engineered that show and co-produced it with Aaron Swartz.
Oh, I remember Aaron, yeah.
That was the first show I ever produced on WHB.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's such a cool story.
Yeah.
I mean, the
23 years
internship part is really fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fun.
I think we kind of talked about the freak, as I like to call him, with Nate, but I felt like that because I started listening to 810 when he was doing mornings, and I'm trying to think how that whole lineup went. I mean, you talked about Dave Stewart and Frank Bull doing Crunch Time. They were kind of
the freak, and then it went Dave Stewart and Frank Bull, and then we had Jim Rome.
Jim Rome, right?
And then it went to
Keatsman.
Kevin Keatsman.
Yeah, right. But there got to be a point when I would turn on 810 in the morning, and the freak wouldn't be there day after day after day, and then he'd be back for a couple of days and then be gone day after day after day, and then before you knew it, there's a whole new morning show. So I don't know what you're at liberty to talk about there, and certainly not wanting to be disrespectful to anybody, but what I don't know that I ever got the true story of what happened there.
He's a fun guy. I had a lot of good times with him, but he liked to party pretty hard.
Gotcha.
And so I don't know.
Had a tough time meeting the bell.
I mean, morning show is a rough go, man.
Yeah. I
mean, it's so he worked hard and he partied hard too. So, and I partaked in a lot of that with him. So it was, I think, to put it politely, it was a bad time slot for him. And but
because they eventually moved him to nights, I think, right?
Yeah. He eventually moved to the nights, and then he went down to Louisville and did, because we have a sister station down in Louisville, and went to work down there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Down there, ESPN Radio. And then I think he's out in Maryland now. That's where he the area that he kind of grew up in. And so
he's doing good.
He's last I'd heard, yeah. I mean, we keep in touch very seldomly, but occasionally we'll go back and forth on social media. And John taught me the freak Renshaw. He taught me a lot. I mean, I learned a whole lot about radio from that man, and so I credit him with a lot of my production skills and just thinking outside the box and just kind of tying sports into entertainment. And, because he would play a lot of movie clips that tied into sports stuff. And it was just a very fast, I mean, he talked a mile a minute, and he was fast. And so it's like to be on the other side of that glass and keep up, it was a challenge, but it was an awesome experience to be a part of. And I'm very appreciative of my time I got to spend with him.
And what about, I have to ask this because
Sure.
I had a crush on Dave Stewart when I was a little kid. So tell me something good about Dave Stewart.
Dave is a very genuine guy.
He really is.
Nice dude. He's.
I've met him, but I was like I went back to being 7 years old and I thought he was cute on the news. Yeah.
Yeah, no, doing that, because I engineered his and Frank Bull. So I would work the Freak Show, I would produce that, and then I'd engineer both shows, the Freak Show and then the Crunch Time. I ran the board for that too. And so working with Dave and Frank, two legends of broadcasting in Kansas City.
Sure, yeah.
And, both, you don't stay in this market for a long time unless, I think Kansas City, just speaking from being a Kansas Cityan, is that, we can smell through some BS, you know. So it's like you know, to be in the industry as long as both those guys were, it's I think it's just a ode to their character.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
So I enjoyed working.
I've never got a chance. I mean, I've met him, but never really had a chance to have a conversation with him to a level of which I would say that I knew him. Frank Bull is who I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
But I have with Dave Stewart, and you're absolutely spot on with his personality. He's such just a genuine, good, salt of the earth type of dude.
Yeah.
Sounds like he should be on the podcast.
I would love it. I mean, I do have his contact. I guess I could reach out to him, but
I'd be like looking.
It's been a while since I talked to Dave. I mean, I think I saw
he's
him.
still working, right? He's at no Mix at 41. Isn't he somewhere?
I'm not sure, honestly. I've kind of removed myself.
You know, it's KMBC.
I
think he's at KMBC.
Is he?
I think so. Let me double check. Somebody keep talking. Tell me something good about Dave or Frank, either one of them.
Oh, I mean, I still keep in great touch with Frank. Frank is, both those guys had a big impact on my career, and especially in radio, just because I'll tell you a story about Frank. The first time I met Frank, I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story.
He is, by the way, at KMBC Channel 9, according to his Facebook. Yes.
Awesome.
Okay, go ahead. So continue with Frank.
The first time I met Frank, I mean, my mom and dad loved Frank on the news, and they'd watch him every night, you know, and that was like before he would come on before, like, you know, I don't know if you remember the George Michael Sports Machine.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That was like every Sunday night is awesome. And Frank was the lead into that. So, you know, I always had a reverence for Frank doing sports. And you know, I actually, my freshman year at Aquinas, I made the varsity team. I lettered, and we won state that year. But
Wow.
We went undefeated and were ranked #1 in the nation.
Wow.
By the USA Today.
Wow, that is incredible.
In 1994 at St. Thomas Aquinas. And I remember Frank coming out and doing some interviews, you know, with the team. And like, that's the first time I actually had in contact with him. But then doing my internship with Whitlock and St. John, like, I remember being in the control room and Frank came in. It was like my first week there. And you know, I stood up and I was like, "Oh, it's so nice to meet you, Mr. Bull." And he looked at me. He's like, "Don't ever effing call me Mr. Bull ever again. It's Frank." You know, it's like,
Oh my gosh.
You know, it's like, yeah, it's
got a little taste of that Italian. Huh?
I mean, it's like that was right out of the gates, and like that. He's been the same guy since that moment.
Yeah.
You know? He's just.
You look at him and you hear him on the air. It doesn't ever sound like the guy ages.
No, he takes great care of himself. You know, he still goes out to Colorado and climbs 14,000 foot mountains.
So I'm gonna keep going down this road for just a little bit, and then we're
man.
gonna get into some deep substance with you. I know that George made a regular appearance on Crunch Time it seems like when I was listening,
he did
with Frank and Dave. We were talking to Bill Althouse from the Examiner, you know, because he had a relationship with George, and I think I don't know if there was somebody else, but Jillian brought it up when we were talking to Bill. You know, sometimes there's stories out there about George, you know, that aren't so flattering, and being that we're huge baseball fans, I
also had a crush on him though too.
Right, of course,
so
right?
I was like, I need to know something about George Brett.
And I'm not trying to put you in a compromising position to speak disparagingly about anybody, but what was your experience with working with George?
I mean, he was a great guy to me. He would come in, I think, once or twice a week he probably did that for a year or two.
Yeah.
And do the show with Frank and Dave sporadically. But he was nothing ever than gracious. I remember, you know, for Christmas one year, I'd order some bats from him and his brother own a company called Brett Brothers Bats.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
So I'd ordered, you know, I'm the middle of 3 boys. And so I have an older brother, a younger brother, and my dad was a giant George Brett fan, along with everybody else.
Sure, right. Who wasn't? Yeah.
Right. But I ordered 3 bats off the internet for my brothers, and I took them in to have George sign them, and he was more than gracious to sign them. And when he could have been like, "Hey, man, like, you know,
that's not what I'm here for."
Yeah,
because I mean, those are the stories you hear, and I feel like those stories are the ones that, unfortunately, doesn't matter who it is, but those are the ones that travel, right?
Sure.
Because it's more fun to tell one that gets somebody going, "Oh, really?" You know, you want to hear that. And I just find it hard to believe that.
Well, I mean, we're all
That's
humans,
the majority.
right? And all you do is have to catch somebody on a bad day,
Sure.
and that's
Right.
that's bad news is more impressive than good news.
For sure.
That's unfortunate. It's the climate that we're in. So
Yeah.
the really enjoyed working with George and just the little amount of time I got to spend with him. He always had great stories.
That's what Ryan Lefevre says.
Yeah.
Like when we say a name, like when we say the name George Brett, what is your first reaction? Great storytelling.
Yeah,
That's right. I forgot about that.
It would be like commercial breaks and it'd just be like George storytelling time.
I would love
Okay,
to have a beer and sit down with him and do
Yeah.
that. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
You worked with Stephen and Nate for a long time. They obviously, you've worked with a lot of different people, but is it fair to say then with the amount of time that you worked with Stephen and Nate that was probably, there was a tighter knit? Or, I mean, you talked about Renshaw and you guys had a great connection, but you could hear it on the air. And I could see it from the times that I would come into the studio that you guys were like the three amigos. You were family. Can you kind of talk about the difference in working with Stephen and Nate versus some of the others and how that had, what kind of impact that had on your life?
I mean, it's one thing to like work with a guy, you know, like say George, right? He came in once or twice a week and it was only for a year or two. But when you show up every day, and I'm trying to think how long. So obviously I was with Stephen, you know, he briefly went to the FM station and then he was the one who replaced Renshaw.
Yep.
You know,
he's at 6'10" now.
Some guy. Anyways,
fair enough.
So he started that show. I want to say that was in so Renshaw started beginning of 2002, and that literally went about, I want to say 16 months. And then Steven started, I want to say fall of 2003. So Aaron and I started producing Steven's show. And then I think Nate jumped on in like 2007, I think.
Okay.
And so just, you know, Steven got to watch me grow up. I mean, and I got to watch him, you know, raise a family. You know, when I first met him, I think his oldest boy, who he used to just call the boy on the radio, but you know,
Richie,
yeah. Richie was only 2 or 3, I think, when I met him.
Gosh.
And so I'm trying to think. Phil I think he's just turned 20 in April. So, you know, I think I might have been around right after Phil was born. And so, you know, and I'm Phil's godfather.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
His godfather, when he was baptized, was Stephen's uncle who passed away. And Phil was only, I want to say 9 or 10.
Okay.
And so, you know, Phil saw Richie and his godfather, and he's like, you know, his godfather passed away. And so he went up to Stephen and was like, can I pick a new godfather?
Aww.
And then so,
wow.
And so, you know, he came, I mean, I remember this, like every time I'm around Phil, it makes me feel so old because I remember him walking into as kids during summertime, they'd come in and watch the show and hang out.
Probably hang out with you in the studio.
Yeah, hang out in the control room and, you know, hang out in the office. And, you know, I remember Phil walking into the control room and he was like, you know, he used to have a lisp and he's like, Jake, can I ask you a question? And I was like, sure, Phil, what's up? He's like, would you be my godfather?
Oh, what? And you're like, is this a joke?
And I looked through the glass and Steven just nods his head. And I was like, I'd be honored to, buddy. Give me a hug. And so, you know,
that is so cool.
Yeah. So it's, you know, I've got to watch him, you know, I think he's a junior now at UMKC and in the business school, crushing his grades are great. And, you know, I got to see him, you know, a month or two ago. And so it's, you know, it's family.
Yeah.
You know, it's family and something else that, you know, I don't want to say it tied us together, Stephen and I, but we both lost our mothers within about 16 months of each other.
Okay.
And, you know, and so just, you know, to go through that grief, to, you know, and identify with somebody who's had that traumatic experience, it just made the bond that we already had that much stronger, you know, and, you know, it's something I still have today, you know, in my desk drawer. So when his mom passed away, my mom hand wrote him a card. And so I want to say it's a week or two after I came back, you know, he still had the card and he was like, hey, I think these words that your mom gave me might really help you. And so, you know, that to pull that card out and read in my mom's handwriting what she had to say to Steven in that moment, it's like, what a beautiful gift that he gave me. And it's like, he was really tight with my mom, and, I knew his mom really well. And it's like such a bonding experience, but like, those are the things that enmesh you, and it's like, those guys will always be family. 'Cause it's like, I saw them more than my real family.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like, 5 days a week, first thing in the morning. And it's like that early in the morning, you really don't want to be around too many people.
Exactly.
So
you and so how long did you guys work together, the three of you?
I want to say, so I finished last February of 22. So, if Nate started in 07, I'm not great with math. That's probably 15 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So.
And when you walked away when?
February of last year.
Last year. Right. Okay. Why did you walk away?
It's a great question.
Is this where we start getting into the thick of it?
I mean,
or do we want to go back a little bit, a few years and
I mean, it's been well documented. I felt like 20 years was a great number. Also, it's like it just, I guess my purpose, right, in life had kind of changed. When I first got into when my mom asked me that question, what do you want to do?
Yeah. What do you love?
Yeah. And so it's like sports talk radio, and so for so long, sports was everything for me.
Yeah.
And it got to a point in time where, I do a lot of, just, I guess, service work. I do some volunteer work with hospice, and I sit with cancer patients, terminal cancer patients. And, I work within, drug and alcohol addiction. And my story is in 2013, I, got to the weight of 374 pounds.
What?
After eating a 75-ounce steak, twice baked potato, 8 pickled beets and a dinner salad at Jess and Jim's, I stepped on the scale at 33 years old and it read 374 pounds. Whoa. And that was, I have a lot of bottoms, I guess you would call them. And that was one of them. But,
dang.
So I do a lot of people with, and I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2015, and it took me 16 months, but I completely reversed that. I was taking 1,000 milligrams of metformin and shooting myself up twice a day with insulin. So I've several different, different health journeys. I openly admit that I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'll be celebrating, a little over 8.5 years. So,
yeah, buddy,
by the grace of God, hopefully 9 years will be in November. But I appreciate the applause, but honestly, if I was able to do it myself, I would have. I got to a point in time where I had to understand that, I'm powerless over that substance, and I needed a power greater than myself to take care of that. So that applause is for God, man. And I only say God.
I love that.
I only say God because I haven't found a shorter word for it. Right. And when I say God, there's not another person in this universe that knows what I mean. It's a God individual to me. And, so with that all said, I felt like, going in to do sports talk radio, which I loved, and I was so blessed to have that job. I felt like I had a bigger calling, so to speak, to, turn a vocation into more than what it was. And I felt like the longer I didn't do that, the more out of integrity I was being with myself. I think God put me through all these trials and tribulations to create a blueprint, if you will, a template, right? And I have an ability to connect with people on a soul level, and and not look at whatever they're struggling with. Just look at the, I believe I'm a 3-part entity, right? I'm a mind, a soul, and a body. And, within that structure, what I really am is when my mind goes away and my body goes away and they do an autopsy on me, they're not going to really find what I am.
Right.
Right. And there's Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest, has a saying, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yep.
And that's what I believe. If somebody, 10 years ago, if somebody would have walked up to me and they say, who are you?
Yeah.
I would say, well, I'm a former Division I college athlete, played soccer for 4 years. I produce a sports talk radio show, all these external things that I used to define myself as who I was, right? I'm a brother of 3,
Yep.
That is who I identified as. Today, that's not who I am.
Right.
Right. That's what I do. Right. Who I am is I'm an eternal spirit soul being, right? That was somewhere before here and will go somewhere after here. I can't answer either one of those questions. Right. I don't know what happens after we leave here. I just have a intuitive feeling that I'm going somewhere else. I don't know why I say that. I just have a belief, and that's mine. That's the personal relationship that I have with God.
Okay.
I don't know what happens when we die. I think anybody that tells you that they do would be lying to you. But I do know that, I am the part of me, right? So I can't remember who it was, but there's an ancient Indian guru, they ask, what's real? What's real in this earth plane that we live on? What's real? And his answer was that which does not change. Right? That's what's real. Right? And so my mind constantly changes.
Right.
My body constantly changes.
Right.
But the thing of me that is still the same as it was when I was born is my soul. Right? And so that's real. That's the
You don't
real
think your
me.
soul ever changes?
I don't think the structure of it does.
Okay.
I mean, what are we using as a definition of soul, right? And for me, it's my soul. And when I say the word soul, I believe that when I was born, I believe, whenever, I don't want to get into the debate of when do we become people, conception or whatever. I believe at some point in time, God put a spark of him into me, right? A God spark, right?
Okay.
And that's my soul. Right. So God lives within me as my soul. Right. And I don't believe that changes. I don't believe that entity, my spirit, so to speak. I don't think that changes. I think my personality changes. I think my mind changes. I think my body changes. But that divine entity that God put in me, that does not change. That's the real part of me.
Do you want to go? Do you want to go next? I got a lot of questions. So
I have a lot of questions too, based on all the things you said. Not like, ooh, I gotta dig into this, but like I was literally just before I came here having a conversation about, like, I had a book and it's in the car, but that has the wheel of like body, mind, soul, and we were talking about that because, and I don't know, I'm just gonna say what I asked this girl. I said, so what is, if you were gonna tell someone, if somebody said, what's the difference in the human spirit and the Holy Spirit, what would you say is the answer? So now I don't know. You didn't mention Holy Spirit.
Sure.
So I don't know where, I don't know. I hate using the word religion or denomination or whatever, because that doesn't really matter, but
there's stigmas.
Right. So anyway, it was just strange. When you said that, I was like, dude, I was just having a conversation earlier about the exact same thing. So anyway.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
I grew up Catholic. I have a profound respect and love for Catholicism. I'll occasionally still go to a Catholic church. But what am I today? I don't know. I'm a Hindu, Buddha, Jew, Sufi, Taoist, Christ lover. I believe that there are universal truths in this world that we live in that you can lay them across any religion and they play. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That's you can lay that over any religion and that's gonna play.
Sure.
Right. And so I constantly.
Do you battle with it though? And I'm not trying to be controversial or try to get you, like Jill says, like a gotcha type of situation. No. But I've talked to others and I've never asked this question. And so I'm honestly asking out of curiosity, because it sounds like you still have a strong amount of respect, not only for Catholicism, but Christianity as a whole, right? But you have a lot of respect for maybe other religions.
Yeah.
And so the whole theory in Christianity about, believing that there's one God and everything else is, a false God, or, am I saying it right, Jill? I'm probably not going to communicate this correctly.
I don't know exactly where you're going, but one God.
Basically that there's one God.
Monotheism.
Right. And so, do you feel like that by having different or respects and beliefs in each religion, that it sacrifices what you should believe as a Christian? I guess, is that my asking?
No, I totally see where you're going with that. And the answer is no, because I have a direct contact every day with God.
Okay.
Right. And it's like, here, let me put it this way. Growing up in Catholic, I would see a lot of people, and I try to live with as little judgment as possible within the human condition. Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's impossible for us not to judge. It's what do you do with that judgment? Right. Do I treat somebody different because I'm judging them? Right. Because and so I more or less call it discernment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. And so what I don't have time for within structured religion is I see people go out and treat people poorly, and then go into a building that people call a church, and then some say I'm sorry about this, or have some remorse or guilt, and then go back out and continue that poor behavior. I don't have time for that.
You mean they have to be changed?
No, what I believe is
I'm saying that like tongue in cheek. Of course, you should be changed if you're going to repent.
Yeah, an actual real absolution.
Yeah.
And so what I have time for is whatever you Ronnie, and you, Jillian, whatever you practice, whatever you decide to do, right? If you go into that practice and then you come out of that practice and you put good into the world, whatever the heck you're doing, keep doing that, please. Because that's what our world needs, right? And whatever you decide is good for your individual soul that keeps you connected to whatever we want to call as a higher power, God, Buddha, Allah, Christ, whatever keeps you connected to that power, right? And then you practice it and then go out and put good into this world and universe. I have no qualms. Keep doing that.
Okay.
It's when people practice something and justify poor behavior because of that practice is what I don't have time for. Yeah. But I do understand where you're going with the Christianity piece, right? And it's like,
because I guess the reason I'm obviously a Christian, we've talked about this on the show, and I have no reservations with saying that freely. I guess where I struggle as a Christian is the believer that, there's a God and he's got his only begotten son, Jesus Christ, and so by believing that, how do I believe in something else?
Well, you don't. No,
I don't. No. I understand that, but I'm just saying because it sounds like that you kind of tapped into each one of those religions to be educated, to be informed, and I'm trying to gather what you gathered from that.
What I gathered from it is I have now a relationship with what I call as God, and that's my God. Right. It's nobody else's God, and I don't push it on anybody else. And I don't say, now, when it comes to Christ, I don't think there's been a better teacher of love in this world that we've known. Right. And so if you ask me to the best of my ability to define God, which is impossible, right? It's actually, for me, it's impossible to conceive what God is. Because the God I believe in is so powerful, my little tiny pea brain down here can't conceive that power. It's impossible.
Okay.
Right? And so if I were try to put it into any type of term, right? It's love. Right?
100%.
Love. God is love. And that's the best way I can say it. And who's been the biggest teacher that's walked this planet that I know of or learned about is Jesus Christ. And so that's how I reconcile that. I don't know. It's like I can't tell anybody they're right and wrong about anything.
No, I understand that.
And I'm not saying that you were implying that by any means.
I hope that you don't want that, because I wasn't. No, right. I'm just trying to get a gauge and understanding of how you're able to understand each of the different religions and then have a verdict, I guess, is for how you're going to believe.
It's, here's what I like, I want to do God's will for me, right? We've heard that a lot. And the reality is I don't know what God's will is for me. I don't. And I don't know if I ever will. No pun intended. But I think what I do know is what God's will is not for me. And from what I've come to learn through my own experiences, and I was raised properly. I'm so fortunate to have two loving parents. A weird childhood because my parents were divorced when I was 7 and they got remarried when I was 11. And that's a whole nother, it's a whole nother gambit. But when I look at what God's will is for me, I know what God's will is not for me. And it's not to be a liar. It's not to be a cheater. It's not to look upon people that are quote unquote less than me. Not everybody is my equal. We're all God's kids here, and it's, so it's like, I know what God doesn't want me to do. So to the best of my ability, I try not to do those things, which you can really boil it down to the 7 deadly sins. Like, try not to live in the seven deadly sins, knowing that I'm a human being and I'm going to fail.
Right.
And it's like having grace for myself to pick myself up when I do. Like, failure is the most powerful thing that we can experience. Like, we can take that tool, right, and really and push ourselves to succeed with that. Like, failure is my greatest teacher. I have a saying, like, I have to have mistakes in my life. I have to. Like, mistakes are necessary in my life, right? That's where I grow and that's where I learn the most.
Yeah.
What's not necessary in my life is repeating those mistakes.
Right.
Right. And so it's like, with all that structure, it's like, I wake up every day and there's a new version of me. Right. And it's like, I try to the best of my ability not to compare myself to anybody else in this world, just who I was yesterday.
Okay.
Right. And it's like, but within that structure, I am human and I have an ego and it's not going anywhere. So it's like, I give this comparison when I talk about, my alcoholism and this body that you see in front of me, just going to, the point where I was 374 pounds.
Right.
So today I have an amends to my body, because this body doesn't belong to me. It just houses my soul. And when I look at my past and how, I was diagnosed with pre-cirrhosis, spots on my liver, and this was, I still drank for 6 years after that diagnosis. Right. And so it's like, I should not be alive. Like, I'm not proud of a lot of my behaviors. But I've learned from them. Right. I can't, I think drinking and driving is horrible. I think it's terrible, but I mean, I did it a lot, and it's only by the grace of God that I didn't hurt myself or someone else.
Sure.
Strictly, and it's like, so I look at my life, and like, for the longest time, my body was riding shotgun. My ego, my mind, my monkey mind, my ego, who I thought I was, right? Jake Guiterrez, right? That guy was driving. And then my soul, my spirit, was sleeping in the back seat. And my ego, Jake, doing what Jake wants to do when he wants to do it, living my life my way. I was driving into bridge embankments and into trees and just driving all over. My body's getting beat up. And my body just looked over and said, try your best to kill me. You're not going to do it, because there's a soul in the back seat that I'm waiting for it to wake up. Right? Because there's a purpose for this guy back here. And I'm not going to let you kill me, because I know that this soul has a purpose. And so I did my best, right? With drugs, alcohol, poor behavior. Eating, the reality is that I was suffering from super depression. I lost my mom at 27, lost my dad at 31. I didn't want to be here, but this is going to sound it might come off wrong and people might take this the wrong way, and that's okay if they do. But like, I was too big of a coward to pull the trigger. That's the reality. So if anything, like, my ego, I guess, did keep me alive from, because, I
did you want to die?
Ultimately, yes, because that's why I continued drinking and eating myself to death. I mean, that's just a slow, hard way to die. I mean,
but you weren't premeditating a death. You were just masking a pain, right?
I mean, I would wake up and I write about this in the book, and this is like scary. This is legitimately scary. I would wake up out of a blackout with an empty bottle of Jim Beam on my right and a fully loaded 9mm with the hammer cocked on my left.
Oh,
in my bathtub.
Oh my.
Right. I mean, so the answer to that question is no, I didn't. That's why when a doctor says, "Hey, Jake, you need to call this liver specialist," right? You have developing spots on your liver and you have pre-cirrhosis. And before I walk out of the hospital, I throw that card in the trash, right? One, I didn't understand that I was suffering from a real deadly disease called alcoholism. And it's not very well understood even by me until I found out what the definition of what a real alcoholic was. My uncle died at 43 of cirrhosis. My father was an alcoholic, but I didn't know what the definition of what an alcoholic was. For the longest time, my definition of what an alcoholic was is when I was 9 years old and my father took me and my brothers to go see my uncle for the last time. And he's dying of cirrhosis on the couch with very little white in his eyes and completely jaundice and not being able to move. Like, that's an alcoholic. Which, yes, that was an alcoholic, but that's not what made him an alcoholic, right? It's not how much you drink. It's why are you drinking, right? That's right. That's the definition. For me, it's like alcohol is just a manifestation of my alcoholism, right? It's just the end result of, I got to a point in time, right? And it's like, why are you drinking? It's because it was my solution. It immediately changed the way I felt. I hate the way I feel. I take a half shot of bourbon, like a half pint of bourbon, and I automatically right? But then I have an allergy to alcohol, right?
Really?
I mean, all alcoholics do, in my opinion.
Okay.
Right? And the definition of an allergy is an abnormal reaction to something, right? And so when I put alcohol in my body, I have an abnormal reaction than a normal person who's not an alcoholic, right? Because, there's a real question that comes up, like you're sitting around a table with some friends drinking, right? And say you're on your fourth drink maybe, and you're having a good night, right? And the waiter or waitress walks over to you and says, "Hey, Jillian, would you like another drink?" You stop, you think about it. Do I want another drink? I might feel hungover tomorrow. I don't know. I'm having a pretty good time. And then you make a decision, right? When that waitress walks over to me, it's a foregone conclusion, right? Do I want another drink? Of course I want another drink.
Gotcha.
Right? I want that fifth drink more than my fourth drink. And I want my 12th drink more than my 11th drink because I activate a craving within my body. My body does not break down alcohol the same way a normal person does. And the isotopes in my body, it creates an allergy, right? And the crazy thing is about alcoholism is self-diagnosis, right? I can't go to the doctor and have them take blood work and they'd be like, "Jake, I got some real bad news for you. You got alcoholism," right? I have to decide that I'm an alcoholic, right? And that I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable. And so, with that arm, because I mean, the reality is that, after my mom passed away, about a year later, my father was diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma, which is kidney cancer. And, and so he had his kidney removed. They thought they got it all. It came back and, and so then he had to go through chemotherapy. And I was living with him at the time. And so we'd go on a Monday morning and we'd sit at KU Med and he would get his chemo and we'd sit there for an hour and watch whatever's on TV. And, and I'd say, "Dad, I'll meet you at home for dinner. I got this to take care of." And he would have this to take care of. And so then I'd come back home at dinner time and he'd be hammered.
Wow.
And I would be beside myself. Like, what? And I would get mad. Like, what are you doing drinking? Why can't you just stop? But I didn't understand that he was suffering from alcoholism. He couldn't. It was no longer a choice.
Okay.
Right? His wife had just died 2 years prior. He felt horrible. This chemo was crushing him. He was depressed. His solution as an alcoholic was alcohol. So that's the only thing that made him feel better. I understand that today.
Okay.
Right? Because he was living with untreated alcoholism. Today, I'm living with treated out. I treat my alcoholism every day. I wake up, I get connected to a higher power, and then I have things in my life that I set. The crazy thing is that as I go down the road, I still have a thought like, hey, maybe it'd be okay to have a drink. I haven't had a drink in 8.5, almost 9 years. Maybe it'd be okay. Like those thoughts go through my head. But it's like within 10 seconds, I can laugh at that. I can shift it and be like, there's no way you can drink, bro. Like you're an alcoholic, man.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's a deadly thought to somebody who's living with untreated alcoholism, right? If they're not treating their alcoholism, right? Which, I like I said, the drink is the manifestation, right? My alcoholism centers in my mind. It's a mental illness. It's a deadly disease that centers in my mind. And that's why I tell, anybody I work with or I have people approach me all the time. Hey, can you talk to my brother? I mean, because alcoholism is a family disease, right? It touches almost everybody in some form or fashion, right? And that's what the alcoholic doesn't understand. They think I'm just hurting myself. I don't understand why these people are on my back about my drinking. I'm only hurting me. Mm-hmm. But that's couldn't be farther from the truth. I'm hurting everybody in my life. It's like when I'm living with untreated alcoholism, it's like putting on a suicide bomber's vest and walking into a room full of people I love and pulling the cord, because I'm hurting all those people. And that's the insanity of the illness. And so it's like with that structure, it's like there's a definite difference between somebody who's suffering from alcoholism and somebody who has a drinking problem, right? That's the first thing I tell anybody. Like, if you have a drinking problem, well, good news, right? If you're an alcoholic, there's not a whole lot of good news for you, right? You're living with a deadly disease that needs to be treated. For me, it's like the best thing that ever happened to me was my alcoholism, right? It's given me the life that I have today. If I wasn't an alcoholic, I might just be a really hard drinker who was a pretty miserable guy to be around. Right. But the thing is that you can, I don't know the science behind it, but I believe that there are people who are born predisposed with genetics.
That's what I was getting ready to ask, is if you felt like you inherited it.
I think that I was predisposed to it. Right. And I think that I wasn't always an alcoholic, right? Because I had a lot of fun drinking.
Okay.
Right. I had, there's like a jumping off point, right? And that I don't know exactly when it happened. I could probably tell you roughly when that happened is when I went from drinking for fun socially. Now I always drank hard and I always had problems with how I drank. Like I would drink alcoholically, but I wasn't an alcoholic. What I mean by that, I'd drink till blackout and, but until the point in time where I drank for a solution to my problems, that's when I became an alcoholic. Okay. When alcohol became my solution for living, right? I don't like the way I feel when I became obsessed with when's my next drink. I'm going out to the World Series in 2014, and I'm more worried about when I'm getting out there and what's in my cooler than to the fact that I'm actually going to a freaking World Series, right? Okay. That's alcoholic thinking, and that's an alcoholic being obsessed with it.
Okay.
Right. And so it's like, until I get to that point, right? And so it's like, you both are parents.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so I look at it as, on some level, I wouldn't have gotten to my bottom without both my parents passing away. So I look at it as my parents stepping out in traffic for me, because today they both have a son who is sober and trying to be the man that they raised me to be. And so, that's like that. I don't think that would be the case if I wasn't an alcoholic. I mean, I hate playing the what if game because it's not real.
Right.
But I like to think that, I am a better person today because I suffer from an illness that I have to treat regularly. I have a God in my life today that handles it for me.
So I have a couple questions. When was the alcohol? So it's a 2-part question.
Sure.
First part was the alcoholism, you said you kind of part maybe, I don't know how you worded it, but as a product of inheritance, right? When did it when do you remember your first drink and when things was it, or was it something, I guess what I'm ultimately asking, was there a life altering event like your mom dying that started the excessive drinking? And then the second part of the question is, did you ever have an intervention, and how involved were Nate and Steven in knowing about your problem? How much did you can talk to them about your problem? And ultimately, was there an intervention there or any help from them?
People would talk to me about it. There was never any said intervention. I was married. I was with a woman for about 11 years. And we were divorced in 2017. And I got sober in 2014.
Oh, okay.
So, we got divorced after I got sober, but within that structure, we got married in 2011, and, she had called the engagement off twice, and I, went and got some help, and, and
she called off the engagement because of your drinking problems. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was an issue. And I, after I got sober, I kind of talked to her, and I was like, when did you first notice that my drinking was a real problem? And it was early in our dating, because my mom passed away New Year's Eve of 2007. And so we started dating like February of 2007, my ex-wife and I. And she said sometime, after we'd been together for about 3 or 4 months, and you left the hospital and you showed up to an event, we were all hanging out, and I could tell that you'd already been drinking before, you were left the hospital and came to the place that we're all at, and you'd already been drinking. So clearly I'd stopped and got some, I'd started drinking before I even got to the bowling alley, because we were meeting a bunch of people to go bowling, okay. And I'd stopped and gotten a big Dr. Pepper and poured half of it out and put some Jim Beam in that. And it's like, that was how I coped. That was my, and so when I think about it, it was probably when it really got bad, when my mom was really sick. But I was still, I got in a lot of trouble drinking, early on, I had
going back how far?
I was cited with a minor in possession at 15. I started drinking at 14.
Okay.
But it's it was like everybody I was around did that on the weekends. It's like I had a fake ID at 16. So there wasn't a party in high school I wasn't invited to, and it's like, I was playing varsity soccer with a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds at 14, and it's like, that's just kind of, I'm not talking bad about, those guys. They were great. They were doing what high school seniors tended to do occasionally,
But you were influenced at a younger age.
Yeah. I had, I hadn't really done it. I was pretty clean cut kid, so to speak, going through grade school and middle school, and, maybe snuck a couple cigarettes here and there from, with my cousins or something like that. But, I didn't start drinking until I got to high school. Early in high school, though, but I was exposed to it.
But was it excessive from right out of the get-go, or was it?
If you know my personality, yeah, it was, but it wasn't unmanageable.
Okay.
Right. And there would be points of unmanageability that I could rein in, but like I said, I was cited for a minor in possession at 15. I was, arrested twice for driving while intoxicated, at
a young age?
At 21 and at 24.
Okay.
Right.
You go back to talking about, being the man that your parents wanted to raise you to be. How did they know about what you were doing, and how did they handle it? Because you kind of alluded to your dad having the same problem.
Yeah. So it's funny, and I don't get into this a whole lot, but I don't have the opportunity to either. So my parents got divorced when I was 7, 6 or 7, when I was in first grade. And then they got remarried when I was 11. So 5 years, right? 4 or 5 years there. And, growing up, I'd always ask my mom, why'd you and dad get divorced? And her answer would always be, It was his decision. It was his choice. Right. And in my mind at 16, 17, 18, it'd be like, oh, dad didn't want to be married, so he got divorced. Right.
Okay.
And I was a complete mama's boy. I'll flat out say that. Both my older and younger brother were, I would say, closer to my dad than I was. I remember like when I overheard my mom telling my grandmother that her and my dad were getting remarried, like I was pissed. I was angry. Because I just got.
So when you said they got remarried to each other.
Yes.
I thought you meant they got remarried to other people and moved on with their lives.
They got remarried to each other.
Okay, that puts another twist on it.
Right. No. So my mom and dad got divorced, and then they married each other.
Okay.
And
you were mad about that.
I was because I mean, it's like you can see little things like this is like. That's why I think like alcoholism is a mental disease. Like I hadn't had a drink yet, but there were things like this in my life that because I look at my alcoholism, right, is the underlining theme of my alcoholism is that like at the root of all my troubles is that I'm selfish and self-centered.
Okay.
Right. It's like, that's why I put drinking above everybody else, because I'm selfish and self-centered. So the root of all my troubles is my selfishness. And I can look back at a very young age and see that kind of stuff. I was selfish because I had just gotten used to the way my life was, right? Went to dad's on this weekend. He coached my baseball teams. Okay. I'm in the groove, right? This is how life is. And then all of a sudden it's like, nope, we're changing it. And it's like, and I remember the night that my dad told me and my brothers that they were getting a divorce. And I don't think I really knew what that meant completely. But then when my dad left the house and got in his car to leave, I remember my mom being real upset, like in tears. And I remember being real pissed off at that point.
Because you saw your mom hurting.
Yeah.
And then when she put the responsibility or the choice on your dad for all those years, you thought it was all his fault.
Yeah.
So then when he's going to come back, you're like,
yeah,
why are you letting him choose to come back?
Like my brothers thought it was the best thing ever. And I think most kids would, right?
Did you ever get over that though?
Absolutely. When my dad passed away, he was my best friend. Like,
how long did it take for you to, I guess, forgive him or be more accepting and not be pissed off that they were back together?
Honestly, it was through my mom's sickness. So my mom, she had thyroid cancer when she was giving birth to my brother in 1972.
Oh, wow.
So she had her thyroid, so the doctor, she would tell you, she would brag about it. Like she had all 3 natural births and all 3 of us were over 10-pound babies.
Wow.
But when she was bearing down, the doctor noticed a lump on her neck. And so she had, had my older brother healthy. And then, I think later that evening or day, the doctor was like, hey, Debbie, we noticed like every time you bear down to push, like we noticed something abnormal on your neck. We need to take a look at that. And so she had a biopsy. Turned out she had thyroid cancer, had her thyroid removed. That was fine. I mean, she lived on synthetic thyroid her whole life. But then a year after my parents got remarried, I want to say this was 1992.
Okay.
She was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Oh.
And so she had a mastectomy and went through, I've since dealt with a lot of this trauma. I don't hide the fact that I go to regular therapy. I have for about 6 years. I've been in and out of therapy prior to that, but I have had the same therapist and I see her about once a month at least for the last 6 years. And, I truly believe in it. I think it works for me. It might not be for everybody, but I think you can, if you find the right person and are able to uncover some things that, I never really would have thought of, but, the fact that I'm 12 years old and in 92, chemotherapy and radiation looked a lot different than it does now.
For sure.
But realizing, watching your mother go through that and having the real, whether you're consciously having the thought, subconsciously it's running through your mind is my mom might die. Right. And that's a really traumatic thing to live with.
Yeah.
But I've since unpacked that and examined it and looked at it and,
Are you still unpacking it? Is that why you continue to go back every month?
No, I I would say for me today, my therapy is where are my blind spots?
Oh, okay.
It's like, what, it's somebody I completely trust in.
Yeah.
I've developed a great relationship with, and it's like, we all have human emotions.
Mm-hmm.
That's normal. The only thing I do know for absolute fact about human emotions is that they change, right? It's the only thing I know for fact about them. They change, right? And so, I try to recall, when do I have negative emotions? Okay, like I need to talk to somebody about this, and what am I missing in this scenario? It's more or less to keep me honest.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, and she would probably be the first one to admit, like, sometimes in our therapy sessions, she learns a lot from me, just in terms of my,
perspective.
Yeah. And my dealing with, with a lot of different things within my health and structure of reversing type 2 diabetes, at 3 different points in time in my life, I went over 350 pounds, like, meaning I got under 300 and then went back over 350 and then got under 300. Like, somebody who does that has an unhealthy relationship with food. Yeah. I mean, that's,
so how did you reverse it?
The diabetes?
Yeah.
Diet and exercise.
So are you on medication?
Not a single one.
No
That's
insulin,
amazing.
Nothing.
That's
amazing.
incredible. No joke.
I had a really good doctor as well. When I went in to see him in 2015, because I'd known, like, so rewind to 2008. I'm living with my dad. My mom had just passed away about 6 months prior. My dad totally guilted me in because I was unhealthy. I was probably about 270 at the time, and I was unhealthy. I was drinking a lot and not doing a whole lot to take care of myself. And my dad gave me the guilt trip because my mom was always on me. And I think there was a lot to that. Like, she saw how I drank. She saw how my uncle drank, saw how my dad drank. And I think it scared her. And she did go to some outside help within different structures to learn about the disease of alcoholism. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate. She never called me an alcoholic, because I think that she would say things to me like, if you continue living the way you're living, you're probably going to end up with a really big problem.
So I think I know the answer to this question, but I found it interesting the way you said how you were fortunate that your mother never called you an alcoholic. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's like, I'll never call anybody an alcoholic ever until they call themselves one first, because I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know I don't, because there's no.
So I'm guilty having done that before.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
But I've never heard of it explained like that.
Well, until somebody calls themselves an alcoholic first, it doesn't matter. Now I can say, hey, if someone says, hey, this is how my brother drinks, this is what he does, I can say, well, those are some really bad tendencies, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
Like, those are some really bad tendencies that I can identify with.
Do you think it would have been traumatic had your mom called you an alcoholic?
Probably not. Probably not traumatic.
Because you said
other people did.
You called it. You said you were fortunate.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to figure out where the fortune was.
Well, the fortune was that she allowed me to diagnose myself eventually.
Okay.
Right? Because she knew it didn't matter if she called me an alcoholic or not, because until I called myself one first, it doesn't matter. And the way I look at it is like, I don't need a solution if I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Right? If I don't have a problem,
okay,
I don't need your solution. And so it's like, so she just gave me little warnings, but I also saw, like, I think she looked at my family history, and like that's where we were going earlier.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah,
that's the horrible thing about alcoholism, is that you can drink yourself into alcoholism, right? What I mean by that is that you can drink so much to a point where your body becomes physically dependent upon it.
Yep.
Right. And then you can be predisposed, like I believe I was. Right. And that's the crazy thing, is that people who don't have any history of alcoholism in their family drink themselves into becoming an alcoholic, meaning that they become, there are things called delirium tremens, or DTs. They're like, people drink so much and their body's so dependent upon it that they will go into deadly seizures without withdrawals. And that's some scary stuff,
So going back then, your mom dies. Fortunately, she didn't call you an alcoholic. You got a good doctor. Your dad was guilting you into your unhealthy lifestyle and how unhealthy you were. And so we were getting to the point where you basically reversed your diabetes.
Right.
Yeah.
So he guilted me into going to get a physical in 2008. And that's when I found out that I had some liver issues. And so I get sober in 2014. And those were fears in the back of my head, like how much damage have I done, really?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was probably about 90, 100 days sober at this point in time. And it's like, I'm really trying to change my life. I'm trying to make some changes. You know, I haven't had a drink in 90 days. I'm going to a 12-step fellowship. I'm really, because I had an incident with my ex-wife, where, for whatever reason, I had some discrepancies that I was hiding from her in terms of financial, drinking the way I drank in 2014. Like I had to have a separate bank account, and I had to have, so there were discrepancies that, that she came to find out about, and we're done.
Yeah.
Like, I'm filing for divorce. Like, do not come home, and so that's when I started getting help. I went to a fellowship to get help in 2011 to kind of make things better, within the structure of our engagement and whatnot. And, came back to her and said, "Hey, honey, great news. I'm not an alcoholic. My problem is hard alcohol. If I just drink beer and wine, I should be fine." That goes back to the self-diagnosis, so I, kept drinking beer and wine for about 6 months and didn't really have any consequences. And I was like, well, I think I could probably go back to drinking booze. And, and so then 2014 happened. And so February of 2015, I'm living with some health fears. I'd already lost 100 pounds, before I even got sober. That's to the steak story. I started making some dietary changes. So I go and get a physical in 2015 because I'm trying to face fears that I have. And this fear of what I've done to my liver is, something I need to walk through. And so at some advisement of a man that a mentor, so to speak, I turned it over to a higher power, went and got a physical.
Okay.
And so my doctor walked in 2015, and I'm, like I said, I've lost 100 pounds. I haven't had a drink in 100 days. And he walks in and, has the charts and looks at me and is like, "Jake, I got some bad news for you." And I'm like, "Oh crap, my liver," right? And he's like, "No, actually your liver looks great. Your enzyme levels are fantastic. You have type 2 diabetes." And I'm like, what a kick in the junk. And I begged him. I was like, my father had type 2 diabetes. My grandmother had type 2 diabetes on his side. And I was like, please, I do not, I'll do whatever you ask. I do not want to go on meds. And he's like, that's not an option. You're living at I think my A1C, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's
a little bit.
An A1C is your measurement of 90 days, your blood sugar over a 90-day period.
Okay.
And a normal healthy one would be 5.5 or 5.0. And mine was 14.3. Whoa. And so I was living day to day. You see people taking their blood sugar, a normal blood sugar should be 100. I was living at 600 or 700 blood sugars. And so he's like, your pancreas is dead. We need to stick some paddles on it and reboot it and, and shock it back to life. So you're going to be leaving here with oral meds and insulin, and you're going to have to go on insulin. And, and this is where, I have a lot of respect for him, because he said, in-house, we have a nutritionist. And if you're really serious about not taking meds, I've read some medical journals where people have put themselves back into pre-diabetic status, and even in some cases reverse their diabetes.
And that's just a whole holistic approach.
Well, I mean, he's go see this nutritionist. He's and because it's through diet and exercise is what the journals say. And so I went and saw this nutritionist, and it's we started going through what I eat, and it's what do you have for breakfast? I'm like, a Cliff Bar and a yogurt. And she's like, that's terrible. I'm like, I've just lost 100 pounds doing that. And she's like, well, what were you eating before? And it's like 3 or 4 Egg McMuffins, a couple of breakfast burritos. She's like, well, no kidding, you lost 100 pounds. But like as a diabetic, these things are horrible. So, I got to learn about that. And that's when I started getting into, I as I was this health journey, I was starting to exercise more and I, I'm an avid runner. I was a runner in high school, soccer player. I was the first freshman at my high school to break the 5-minute mile. I ran I think my fastest time as a freshman was like 4:42. Okay. The mile. So I could just run. And so as I was getting back to, losing this weight, I'm walking and jogging, and it's like, I've had 4 knee surgeries, and it's like my knees would hurt, and it's like I would take a leave, and then I know how bad that is on your kidneys. And so I was listening to this podcast, and this woman named Dr. Kellyanne Petrucci was on it. And she talked about the benefits of bone broth. And it's a book called The Bone Broth Diet. And and that's where I learned about intermittent fasting. And that's where I learned about bone broth, which I still take. I drink a pint of bone broth every day. I make my own.
Really?
Yeah. And so that's kind of how my health journey got kicked up to another level. And then within that structure, seeing this dietitian, I got off insulin in about 10 months by just exercising. I had 2 young Rhodesian Ridgebacks. I'd have to walk every day or else they'd go crazy, so I was walking about 2 to 3 miles every day. I was changing my diet. I was doing intermittent fasting. And so within that structure, I started, changing my health. And so, I went in about every 4 months just to get a regular checkup. And, just to do my blood work to see where I was at. And after about, I want to say it was about the 10-month or 12-month period, he was like, your numbers are doing great. You're still a little high. We're going to take you off the insulin. We're going to keep you on the oral meds, and we're going to knock down from 1,000 to 500 milligrams. But like, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Awesome. So then I go back in at 16 months, and I came in, and my doctor was almost in tears. And he's like, I don't know what you did, but you are no longer diabetic.
Wow.
According to this blood work. And he said, something that he's like, I don't know if I believed it when I told you that. He's like, I've never seen it. He's like, I've read about it in medical journals.
Right.
He's like, but I don't he's like, to be honest with you, every person I give this diagnosis to says the exact same thing that you said. I don't want needles and I don't want any medication. Is there anything I can do? And I tell them the exact same thing I told you. And I've never seen anybody do this.
I'm guessing, based on how you're explaining it, is you were very committed and disciplined to the process. Or did you ever cheat from your diet, or how committed and disciplined were you? Oh,
extremely. But I mean, I'm human. I still fall back, and it just kind of wouldn't let it snowball.
Okay.
Right. And it's I also hated sticking myself with a needle in the stomach twice a day.
Yeah, I bet.
Right. And it's I was finding a different version of myself, and I really loved that, and it's and what the doctor said to me is and I take a lot of pride in this, and not in a bad way, but just, to let other people, and I'm appreciate this forum to share this, because it is possible, and people don't even know that. Right. And it's, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but there is an industry that does make a lot of money off you taking that medicine for the rest of your life. And they don't,
because they want you to believe the money is in there's no money in the cure. The money's in the medicine.
Right. And it's and honestly, if you can just take this needle and shoot yourself up and eat whatever you really kind of want to, and this regulates it for you, that's way easier than completely changing your lifestyle. But the doctor said to me, is I tell people the exact same thing I told you. I've read about it. And now I can look my patients and with full confidence and say, if you really mean that, I have a patient who completely reversed this in 16 months.
Wow.
Go see my nutritionist and see what she did and see what he did. And it's you've armed me with truth now that I can, and what they do with it after I give it to them is up to them. But he's like, I told you what I read. And I don't know if I really believed what I read, but I told you because I read it. And you know, we're looking for something.
Yeah.
He's like, and now I can tell people, like, I have a patient who's completely reversed it. And he doesn't take any medicine anymore. And he was as bad as anybody I've seen.
Would you say that aside, I'm trying to get all the timelines right now. So this happened after recovering?
Yeah. Yep. So I got sober in 2014, November. Okay. This happened in February of 15.
Okay. Pretty close.
Yeah.
So now you've had two pretty significant events that have happened in your life. Is that kind of where the inspiration starts coming, or you start premeditating the idea of taking this journey and using it as an opportunity to serve others?
Man, I guess there's some different things that had happened. Being that, like, I had some dark spots in my recovery. Oh. You know, I got divorced in my recovery. Sure. You know, today in my life, you know, nothing doesn't have a reason. You know, everything has a purpose. Whether I get to see it while I'm here on earth or not is up to God. But I believe everything that happens to me is I have some, you know, things I've been able to develop, right? I don't know if you're familiar with Jocko Willink. He's a former Navy SEAL, and he does a lot of motivational stuff. Oh,
yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Is he the guy who was really obese and
no, I mean, that's Goggins.
That's Goggins. That's right.
I love Goggins and Jocko both. They both were Navy SEAls, but Jocko talks about extreme ownership, right? And so it's like within that structure, it's like, and it's hard for people to do and own. It's like anything that happens to me, I have some kind of ownership, whether it's 99% of it's my fault or 0.0000001% of it's my fault. You know, whether somebody T-bones me on a, you know, going through an intersection, like I have part of it is my fault for being in that spot at that time. You know, is it 99% that guy's fault? Yeah. Is it maybe very little my fault? Yeah. But I have to take ownership in that, like in everything that happens to me. Right. And it's like, that's something I try to develop. And it's like, did that happen? You know, all that stuff I look at, like, there's a reason behind that. And like, where did I decide to take my leap is like, I got to a point in my sobriety where, I was living a very unprincipled life, and I just wasn't drinking. Right. I was doing things and acting in certain ways where I thought, like, man, I thought I could only do these kind of things when I was drinking, and I'm treating people this way and I'm doing this kind of stuff. And it's the reality of that lesson was that I'm just not drinking, and that's not what being sober is about. Right. That's not like, and so that's when I truly learned that I had to, you know, turn my entire life over to God, right? Not just the parts that I want to, right? Not just, hey, God, I can't stop drinking. Will you help me with this? It's like, no, I got to turn it all over. It's not, you know, it's like, I can't, you know, cause there's parts of me that want to be like, hey, isn't it just good enough to be 95% honest? Right. You know, and I'm not saying walk around lying to people, but you can be dishonest by withholding information. You know what I mean? It's like, no, like if I want the freedom that I want, I have to walk a certain way. I have to live a certain principled life, you know? And so it's like, those are things that I had to learn within my sobriety is like, you know, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but like first thing I do almost every day is I, you know, meditate and I pray. And it's like, that's a non-negotiable for me. Right. Like I don't leave my house before that happens. You know, if it means being late for something, it means being late for something. But this is the most important because my sobriety has to be number one, which means my relationship with God has to be number one. And I've come to find out that anything in my life that I try to put above that, I will lose or it will suffer. Right. And people don't understand that. And true, I don't have kids, but I'm still willing to believe I have nieces and nephews and brothers and aunts and uncles that like, I can't put anyone above that because when I do that, then they're not getting the best version of me.
Yep.
Right.
I agree with that.
And it's like, if I'm not getting connected with my higher power and being the best version of me, well, I'm just not, I'm not being, I'm not being any help to anybody else really. And so it's like within that structure, it's like, I mean, the seeking is not in the finding, it's in the seeking. Like, and that's where I've come to understand. It's like, that's like, I wake up every day and I'm a new person. It's like, I need to see what this person's going to be like today. And some days are worse than others. And some days are better than others. And it's like, what I try to cultivate are principles that I live my life by, where I can review my day at the end of every day. And Goggins talks about the live autopsy, right? And it's really what it boils down to me now is like, I've been able through, living the way I live is to develop a guidance system, right? And we are all given it at birth, right? We know right from wrong, and it gets warped as we grow up and learn different things and become different personalities. Yeah. But ultimately, like, that comes down to like, when did I feel good in my day? And when did I feel bad in my day? And like in those moments, what was I doing when I felt bad? And usually it's like, I probably wasn't being a very good person, or I probably wasn't being my best. And so it's like, how do I rectify that tomorrow? And it's like, when I look at my day, it's like, where did I feel really good and where did I feel bad? And it's like, I carry into the next day. It's like, where I felt really good, why don't we do some more of that? And where I feel really bad, like, do I owe somebody an amends? Do I need to go fix it? And if I do, I need to go fix that tomorrow. Right. And it's like, why don't I do less of that? Sure. And so it's like, that's kind of how day to day I try to live. I mean, because none of us are guaranteed more than this moment. I mean, that's the crazy thing. Like, I don't decide when I get here. Like, that's not up to me. And I don't decide when I leave here either. That's not up to me either. Yeah. So it's like, within that structure, it's like, hey, when it's my time, it's my time. But before that, it's like, I want to put as much good into this world as I possibly can.
I love it. Do you have any questions?
You've been out of radio a year and a half.
Yeah. Yep.
And so you're in what? I mean, I know you said you're writing a book.
So I do. I mean, I call it personal wellness guidance. Other people call it life coaching. But it's helping people with an array of different things. Whether it be nutrition, whether it be bereavement, loss of loved ones. I've dealt with that. Within the structure of my volunteer work, I've learned a lot about transitioning. Sitting with people, passing on. I've studied under some really heavy hitters in that realm. A man named Frank Ostaseski, who wrote a fantastic book called The 5 Invitations. But he's one of the foremost authorities on transitioning. He was the founder of the first Buddhist hospice in the United States in San Francisco. So I've spent some time with him. The reality is that outside of my own experience, like, nothing I say is mine, right? It's all stuff that I've acquired along the way and learned from others. And it's like, I just, I don't have any true wisdom other than my personal experience, but I'm always trying to learn more. I'm always trying to educate myself on, it's kind of, I laugh at this when I say it, but the only thing that I know for sure is that I don't know anything. And what I don't know is way more important than what I do know. And so like that's kind of how I try to live day to day. So what am I doing? I'm helping people. They can reach out to me. My website's samuraiofsoul.com. If you just I have people just reach out and we have a Zoom call. And sometimes I can help them, and sometimes, it's, I can at least guide them in a different direction, or, try my best to carry on. But, I have a couple of people I'm working with right now, in different realms, whether it be drug and alcohol addiction or, nutrition, all those things. I believe, that I have these templates And, I don't think any of us have a worse life than anybody else. Like, I don't think just because I lost my mom and dad at an early age that like that's bad, right? That's just my stuff. We all have our own stuff.
Sure.
No one's stuff is worse than mine or better than mine. It's just theirs. And so, I've created templates, so to speak, and I try to hand these templates off, and you lay them over you and bolt them down where they fit. It's like, if this worked, this is what worked for me. This is what I've learned through this process. What can you take from this process and fit it to you, to your own, because what works for me isn't going to work for you. It's just not, because we're not the same. There's only one person with this DNA in this world, so but I can say, hey, these are some places to start, and these are some things that you should look at. And it's like, self-evaluation for me is vital. Yeah. It's vital, and it's really hard to do, honestly.
Yeah, it is.
I have a couple questions that are, one of them is on topic. The other one's not, because you've referred to your diet and how much the diet has changed so much of your life, changing your diet. How extreme has that been? I've heard people who have gone extreme with trying to find themselves and create a new, I don't know if a new identity is the right way to explain it, but so they'll become 100% vegan. Sure. And they won't eat red meat. Like, how extreme have you gone, or have you gone down that road? Are you somewhere in between? What does that look like?
I've gone as extreme as possible, in different areas. Right. So I went 2+ years without eating any meat except for fish. I just added that back into my diet.
What was the reasoning for that?
Just to see what it was like.
Okay. So it was just an experiment. It wasn't because you were told that this was what was going to be the outcome.
Right. No, and it's like just to see how this was going to feel.
Okay.
I went pescatarian, I guess is what it's called, until I want to say early this year, I started eating meat again. What I've learned is that, and why because it's a divisive topic. If you spend any time on social media, like, the carnivore diet, the all vegan diet, these people swear by this and these people swear by this. And it's like, I think from my experience and just examining it, usually when you go all carnivore or you go all vegan, you're cutting out processed food.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, you feel awesome eating all meat all the time and only meat that's properly sourced. Yeah. You feel great. Sure, you're eating all plant-based and all whole foods and you feel great. Well, what's the common denominator?
Right.
Processed food.
You're leaving the middle of the grocery store out.
Yeah,
there's no food being purchased in the middle of the grocery store.
Our food sources are, it's horrendous, but it's also the reality that we live in. People think just because you buy organic food that there's not pesticides on it, which is completely false. There's still pesticides on the organic food. They're just organic pesticides, Okay. That's, that's what it is. So it's like, I've learned a lot, and I don't push any of my beliefs on anybody else because it's for me. And so I've gone as extreme, but it's like, I still, 2 weeks ago, I had a large pizza from Fat Soli's. I hope you start advertising here.
I haven't tried that. So
I haven't either. That's why. But it's like, I feel like I don't like to call it a diet because I don't like, and just from my experiences, because I've had a lot of different journeys within the health structure. It's like, goals are good to some level. I don't really believe in them all that much anymore. I think, if goals are for you, keep doing it. But I also, from my experience, is like, if I set a goal to lose 40 pounds, like what happens once I lose 40 pounds?
Yeah.
Right. So, I believe in systems, right? So it's like, I have a nutrition system. It's a caloric system. It's how I want to eat, what I want to eat. It's like, here's the best way I can describe it. I like this example and follow with me. It's like, I always have like a to-do list, right? And so if on my to-do list is clean my garage out because my garage is a mess, right? I spent a Saturday, I spent 12 hours cleaning my garage and it looks great. right? And then 3 months later, my garage looks like a disaster, right? And then I have to put it back on my to-do list and make it a goal to clean out my garage, right? Well, there's something flawed in that, right? It's like now, if I create a system and everything in my garage has a place,
Sure.
and when I take it out of that place and I put it back in the place that belongs, my garage is never going to get messy because the system is going to be in place and I work the system.
My wife is yelling at her at this whatever she's listening because my garage is a mess right now. She's like, "You see, Ronnie, you need to get a system."
Right. So I believe like
I'm hearing it. I'm hearing her screaming at me.
That's just a good example. But like for anything in my life, right? So I have a system. Like I wake up, I pray, I meditate, I exercise my body in some form or fashion every day. It's like I create these structures, these systems in place because, you know, I'm a daily runner, man. I woke up this morning and I ran 6 miles.
Wow.
Like, and you know, I ran 5 miles yesterday, and I'm not sitting here to brag that I run,
yeah.
but it's like, I hate running. I don't like running, right? But I like the feeling of being done with running. I like the feeling of being healthy. I like the feeling of having a healthy heart and a healthy body. And, you know, I run more for my mental health than anything. Right. I mean, I suffer from suicidal depression. Yeah. Like diagnosed with it. Right. And I feel if I go 2 days without running, I'm off. I am off. I'm irritable, discontented. I don't like the way I feel. And then bad thoughts start coming in. But I know when I get the proper, our brains are chemical factories. That's all they are. They are giant chemical factories. And there are ways to put good chemicals in my brain. Yeah. You know, and that's exercise. You know, I'm a big believer in the cold plunges. I'm a big believer. I was
going to tell, I have that written down if you still do the cold baths every day.
Yeah. I mean, I do them a lot less right now because I don't have I have a tub I have to fill up with ice and like this time of year dropping, you know, for 220 pounds of ice, you know, $40. I try to do it once a week. Okay. You know, wintertime, I do them every day. Okay. And I'd eventually like to invest in a system where it's a cold tub, you know, but those things, you know, they run $5,000-$6,000 for those things. And I just went out to Tractor Supply Company and bought a 150-gallon
horse tank.
Yeah, feed tub.
And, so you need to follow Jake on Instagram because he shows this kind of content on his Instagram. It's at Jake Guti.
You got it.
Guti.
Nailed it.
And so I've seen you do this, and I've seen Rogan talk about it. You know, and then of course he does the one extreme to the other, where he'll do the cold and then go into the sauna. And it's like 140 degrees in there or something ridiculous. So I gotta try to fit this in. You do eat red meat now.
Yes.
And you like it.
I love it.
All right.
It's great.
Because we have a sponsor called Brown Piercy Cattle Company.
Now I know where you're going.
Yeah, they've been breeding registered Angus cattle for generations with one thought in mind: quality beef for consumers, with their goal to deliver prime graded beef directly to customers' homes more affordably than you can get them at the store. It's better beef conveniently delivered at a lower price than the grocery store. You can find them online at brownpiercycattle.com. And for each of our guests who come onto the podcast, we're going to get you 4 premium thick cut steaks, 4 of their famous steak burgers, and 2 family size roasts, along with 4 pounds of 93% lean ground beef. So I was hoping to give you that prize at the end of the show, but then when you started going on, I was like, man, he may not want this. No. So you can use that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I wanted to go down that was a little off topic, because we were talking about pharmaceuticals and your passion, I guess, to avoid them.
Yeah.
What kind of moral dilemma did you go through during the pandemic with the vaccine? Because I think we've got some friends who are pro-vaccine.
Sure.
And I'm going to guess that you were against it.
Very much so. For me.
And did that cause any, for you, exactly. And I was the same way, and to each their own on that. And I never, ever, ever tried to say, don't get the shot, don't get stuck. But did it cause any conflicts with any of our friends?
I mean, I tried to avoid the topic. I mean, as much as possible. There were different times of frustration where I just kept my mouth shut. and I don't know if that was the right thing or wrong thing to do. Here's how I looked at it is that, especially with my experience of getting off pharmaceuticals, is like, how can anybody possibly tell me what's good for me? Who can be a bigger authority of what should go in my body over me? Because look what I've done, right? I'm a complete sober person. I don't put any drugs or alcohol in my body, right? I've reversed type 2 diabetes and gotten completely off of those drugs. You know, I suffer from suicidal depression. I completely got off Zoloft, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, so, right. How can anybody with and sit there and say, hey, this is what you should do. Right. Because I mean, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I mean, I'm not anti-vax, right? But I believe in vaccines that have been studied, that you have, you know, the measles and mumps vaccine where it's been 100 years and they say, well, here's the proof. Here's the data of what happens to somebody 50 years after taking this.
Right.
Right. That data was never presented to me. What does this do to my body 5 years from now? Nobody could provide that for me. So why am I going to put something in my body that I don't know what's going to do in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Right. And so that's just my take on it. Right?
Sure. And as much as you had that as your take and the way you make it sound, you never really pushed that take on anybody else. Is that fair to say?
100%.
How much do you feel like you were being forced through, whether it's family or friends, to get it, and then that caused any problems because they knew how stubborn you were about pharmaceuticals? I
don't know what this says about me, but very few people approached me with that.
Because they knew they probably weren't going to get anywhere with it, right?
Well, I mean, it's like, you know, I think if anybody did, I would just say that's great. I'll take it under consideration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it an issue in the workplace?
Fortunately for me, no.
Were you?
It wasn't.
That's good.
Yeah.
Because you were still working at HB then?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I was the only one that continued to go in. And it's like, and that's kind of why I really cranked in on this book, honestly, is because my life didn't change really. Like, my life didn't change because of this pandemic. It didn't. I woke up, I went to work, I got home, you know, like, and so I had people in my life who I really respected, and I would classify them as educated people. And they would come up to me and they're like, what are you doing, man? Like, you don't seem fazed. Like, my life is falling apart.
Yeah.
And enough of those people came up to me that I'm like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
Right? Why are they coming to me? Like, why are they seeking my counsel? And what do I think about this stuff? And that's why I started being like, well, I'm doing something and I need to put it down what I'm doing, and then people can do with it what they will. Right? Because this is just my experience. And it's like, you know, just the statistics of what happened, you know, they're phenomenal. The mental health issue and crisis that we're going through, and, you know, the rise of drug use and the fentanyl issue and you know, alcoholism and all of it. You know, I saw it firsthand, you know, and it's like, you know, did people try to push their views on me? Not really. And it's also, I just, you know, I try not to be combative, and I try to, you know, any situation I was put in, I just tried to look at it with compassion and try to be like, you know, they believe what they believe for a reason. Right. And I respect it and I get it. And it's like, but it's like, you know, I don't want to argue. I mean, and it's like that ultimately, it's like, I didn't have too many arguments. Now, you know, being where we are now, it's like people don't, you know, look at, you know, I think in a good period from time from now, I think, you know, we just saw the greatest transition of wealth in the history of mankind, you know, and nobody talks about that. You know, it's like, you know, Costco got to stay open, but, you know, small mom and pop stores had to close. And it's like, you know, for whatever reason, like, I had to examine, and I'm thankful for it because I got to look at a lot of things I never looked at before in my life, right? I got to really look at how the system, quote unquote, runs and why people in power were able to do what they did. And we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but, I'm no longer a U.S. citizen.
Was not expecting that one. Okay.
I'm a private American national.
I've heard about this before.
Yeah.
I've seen content out there where like people will get pulled over by the police and they'll ask for their.
I'm not sovereign. Some of those people are
Okay,
sovereign.
you're going to have to maybe.
I've heard of a sovereign. I've never heard of the other that you said.
And we've got just a little bit of time. So trying to clarify and distinguish between the two.
So basically.
And why you did it, I guess. Also,
why I did it is because I saw what are quote unquote mandates that aren't laws that people had to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As a U.S. citizen, you don't have any rights. You don't have you don't have the Bill of Rights and you don't have constitutional rights. You have privileges granted to you by a trust run like a corporation called the United States Corporate. And it's a 10 mile by 10 mile square in the District of Columbia. And they get us all in it at birth through our birth certificates.
Okay.
And then, you guys both have had kids. There's something called a certificate of live birth. And then they walk up to you and they say, Ronnie, you got a healthy young daughter here. We need you to fill this out, this paperwork, and we need to get her a birth certificate. Right? And you fill it out. And then where does that go? It goes to whatever county she was born in. And it registers her with the county, just like you register your car. Mm-hmm. That's why at any point in time, the state can come up and say, Ronnie, you're an unfit parent. We're taking your child from you. At any point in time.
Okay.
They get to decide that, right? Not saying that you ever would be an unfit parent, but they are the ones that decide whether you're fit or unfit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's a U.S. citizen. And if you study the history, and it's not taught in schools, but U.S. citizenships were set up by, basically the Proclamation of Emancipation, right? When Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. That's when U.S. citizenship were set up. And that was because no state wanted to allow, and they made the process really lengthy for former slaves to become statesmen and women of their state. And so they had a huge problem on their hands. All these free men and women that don't have any state, they don't have any citizenship. So they created the U.S. citizenship, U.S. citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And they created the 10 mile by 10 mile square of District of Columbia. And that was their state. And they gave all the slaves U.S. citizenships. Now, how did we get to where we are today? Well, if you go back, you're probably, my great-great-grandparents, they weren't U.S. citizens. They were statesmen and women. Whatever state, like Kansan, that's my nationality now. I took that birthright back, right? Once you clarify and get a birth certificate, it trumps your statesman and your statesmanship.
Okay.
Right. And so and then what happens when you turn 18 is you register to vote and you register for a draft. And that's how they get you back into the system. And it's like nobody knows about this because it's generational. They've just completely washed it out. And why did it start happening? Well, in 1933, our country is about to go bankrupt. We were running out of gold.
30s.
We were running out of gold.
Mm-hmm.
And the Federal Reserve went to, our country and they said, you're about out of gold. Like, what are you going to use for collateral in your dollar? And they say, well, we have Ronnie Philips here. He's going to make this amount of money in his lifetime. Can we use him for collateral? You sure can. You just need to get him a citizenship, get him a social security number. And that's when they started making everybody U.S. citizens. And that's, right around the time income tax started. And that's, all that. I mean, income tax was created for federal employees. That's the only people that were federally taxed. And then World War I came around, and people who couldn't go over and fight, they were like, we want to do something for our country. Like, what can we do? And they said, well, we tax our federal employees. If you're willing, you can pay a federal tax on your money. And that would be going to the war support. So they realized, oh, people are willing to pay this. Let's make everybody do it. Right? I mean, and then people are like, well, you don't pay taxes? And I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but it's like, no, I do pay taxes. I pay for our roads. Every time I go pump gas into my car.
Right.
Right? You don't pay for the schools? No, I do pay for schools. Every time I go down to Hy-Vee and buy groceries, I pay a lot of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Because you're paying the sales tax is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it was set up for. Like what they've done is our founding fathers created a republic, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then what they've done is they've covered our republic over with a democracy, and that's what we have now.
Yeah.
And they say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? They say it right there. There are currently two systems running this country, right? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And to the republic
for which it stands.
Yeah.
Right. So they're admitting there wouldn't be the word "and" if they weren't separate. The pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the flag of the United States of America. And I also pledge to the republic for which it stands. Right. So there's a republic and there's a democracy, and they don't want you to know about that. They don't want anybody.
When did you do this? So you're not sovereign. You said you're a nationalist, right?
Yeah, I'm a statesman, if you will.
Okay. All right.
I'm a Kansan.
When did you do this?
I started the process early last year.
How long did you research it? I really had no idea we were going to go down this, but this is very fascinating to me. So how long did you research this? How did you find out about it before you decided to pull the trigger and be so convicted? I mean, because that's when you're what, 40?
43.
43. Yeah. Like, so you know what you know, right? And you think that being a U.S. citizen is what you strive for, right? Like you've got that when you use the word privilege, like we're privileged to be U.S. citizens. And now you're kind of like, well, maybe it's not as...
No, I have rights. That's like you guys have privileges granted to you by the government. I have rights.
What does that mean?
What does that mean is that they can mandate you to take a shot if they want to. And you have to take it because you're a U.S. citizen. They can mandate you to, whatever they want because you've agreed to it.
Can they, what about, how does that work with, sorry to interrupt, Joe. How does that work within the laws? So are you mandated to drive 55 miles per hour?
See, the answer is no, I'm not.
I knew that was coming.
It's a city ordinance violation and I have constitutional rights.
Yeah.
Right. And one of those is I can travel across this country. And if you can't impede my right to travel if I'm not breaking the law.
Okay.
And the speed limit is not a law. It's a city ordinance violation. And according to Black's Law's Dictionary, which every court in the country goes by, the definition of a crime is when I commit harm to a person or entity. So I'm traveling across this country, not committing a crime, which I'm not doing any harm to a person or entity by going 80 and a 55. Now, I don't drive around speeding everywhere because I believe... I'm
trying to use that as an example.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I do know if I get pulled over, it's going to probably cause me more trouble than I need, So
do you have a driver's license?
So, a driver's license, if you research driver's license...
Every question is loaded.
It's a commercial license.
Yeah.
You're doing commerce, and I don't practice commerce. So I don't need a driver's license to practice commerce.
So what happens when you get pulled over? What do you show them? Because this also, what I was thinking, what my original question was going to be, so you can speak to any or all of this. My daughter is getting ready to turn 18. So she got the intermediate driver's license when she was 16, but now it's expiring. She has to get a new one. My tags are due on my car, so I need to go. So the whole DMV thing, where you're like, oh, and then it's like you bring two of these documents, but this document, this whole list of things, and then you have the real ID, right? Because that's coming next year. You can't travel with the real ID. So my thought is, how do you prove who you are, and how does that stand up in court or when you get it pulled over, or do you have to go to the DMV? These things.
They have passports for nationals. It's called a 5-star passport.
Okay.
And
that sounds fancy.
Yeah, it's
you got one on you?
5-star.
I don't.
I'd love to see what it looks like.
It's at a level of a 5-star general. So if I'm in a different country and there are war breaks out, I'm a priority to get them out of that country.
Stop it.
No, absolutely. That's why it's called a 5-star passport.
How do you get it?
I mean, it's a lot. Like, so I like, this is not, first off, I want to like, this is not for everybody.
Right.
It's just not like, I've had to, it's like learning a new language, learn about trust law. I mean, that's how I don't own anything. I don't own anything. My trust does. I have a public and private trust that operates in the private, right? Bank account, a DBA, doing business as. I do business.
Everything is registered in your trust.
Everything is registered in my trust, right? I still have tags on my car, and I because a year hasn't passed since I've gotten all my, like, so you used to hear them say, make sure your house is in order, right?
Yeah.
This is what that means. Like, this is the things that our great grandparents would have to do to protect themselves as statesmen and women. Like, but it's been completely washed out of our society. Because I mean, that's just that it just takes a few generations.
Right.
And because it's like, once all that happens, it's like, now we have the system and you're in the system. And so to answer your question, if I get pulled over, it's like, and I do have a driver's license that hasn't expired yet because I got it before I started this process.
Yeah.
I don't use it. I don't like to, have to use it. I also have like, so to get to, without getting too complicated, like, I'm not under circuit 1 and 2 jurisdiction.
Okay.
Right. I'm considered under circuit 3. Right. And so I would have to take over the courtroom and demand a circuit 3 judge. And it's like, before I even walked into court, I would submit all my work and everything. 'Cause you have to set it up. Right. So, I have to submit it all as evidence that's been documented, that's been signed off by 6 different branches of the government, county, state, federal. I have it recorded in Bighorn County, Montana. My status, my political status is what it's called. Your political status is you're a U.S. citizen, not Democrat, not Republican. Your political status is you're a U.S. citizen. My political status is I'm a Kansan. I'm an American statesman. That's my political status. And it's fascinating when it is fascinating.
I guess I need to ask this.
I still had to do, like, I had to file paperwork for taxes, right? But I don't pay any federal taxes. I don't pay any state taxes because of how I have it set up. I send a 13-page document to the IRS down in Austin, Texas, and cite all my work and show them who I am. Right? Because think about it. If I get pulled over, right, and the cop, what's the first thing I ask for?
License and registration.
There you go. And then what happens when you hand them your license and registration? They take your license, and what's the question they ask you? Ronnie Philips? Mm-hmm. Is this you?
Yeah.
And what's your answer?
Yes.
Okay. And so you become that piece of paper in their hand. They go look you up in their system. Mm-hmm. My answer to that question would be, officer, and without sounding like a complete smart ass, right? How could that piece of paper in your hand possibly be the sole living being that God put me here? That's not me in your hand. It's a representation of who I am. But that's not me. That's not who I am. But we consent to it as soon as they ask you, is this who you are? Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Now I'm going to take you and look you up in my car. And also, it's like I'm in the process of getting it cleared out in the system.
Right.
Where I would, like, in my passport, it says do not detain. In my passport, right? And so, like, in their system, once I have it set up properly, they would go back and they'd look me up and it would say, do not detain.
So it wouldn't matter what you did?
If I didn't commit a crime, if I was breaking a city ordinance violation. Now, if I run a red light and smash into somebody and kill them, that's a crime. Mm-hmm. I did harm to another person or entity.
Yeah.
If I get in a wreck, that if I'm at fault, that could be committing a crime if I did harm to their car or if I did harm to them. I just, that's the definition of crime is what's important. Mm-hmm. Like, no one can impede my travel if I'm not committing a crime. And them pulling me over for speeding is impeding my travel, my right to travel.
So this process takes some serious education.
Yep.
And deep, you called it in the weeds. Like you really got to get in there to understand, because it's not just that sounds cool, I'm going to go be one now. It doesn't work like that. So I guess what I'm ultimately asking is, you felt like the juice was worth the squeeze, and why?
How free do you want to be?
Okay,
ultimately?
So I'm asking then, how much more free are you than us?
I mean,
in your opinion?
I mean, look, freedom's a feeling, right?
I guess so.
I mean, so it's like,
but right to us, but like it was obviously something more significant to you to go through all of this. And then if something happens, you're going to have to go through a whole lot more.
Right. But also if I'm illegally detained, I have a fee. Like it's all like I have a fee schedule is what it's called. So if I'm illegally detained, like I'm like, people get fired for illegally detaining people. It happens. Like, I mean, look, to go back to a question you asked me earlier is like, when did you find out about this and how did it come about? And then I'll go back to the question and answer the like why I really felt the need to do this. I found out about it. I went to this symposium. It's called the Health Freedom for Humanity. And I sat there and I listened to this guy talk about this and for about 20 minutes. And I'm like, this guy is off his rocker. This guy is nuts.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sitting there with my friend and, you know, and I'm like, have you ever heard of this? This guy's crazy.
Okay.
You know, and he says these words. He's like, if you think I'm crazy, good. Go do your own research. Go do your own homework.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay. And that's when I started researching it. Is October of 2021.
Okay.
And I started, and like, you got to be really careful out there because there are people trying to capitalize off it. They're trying to make money and trying to set up, like, you know, can somebody just set you up a willy-nilly trust? And, you know, there's people profiting off a lot of people out there and they're not doing it properly. You know, I got connected with a guy down in Florida and you know, he does it. He does an interview with you and then you have to commit to, you know, and it's not an expensive process, but you have to study. He gives you stuff to look over. I mean, like he helps you through the process, but through that process, like you have to learn what you're doing because like you would get run circles around if you don't know like you have to speak a different language. I mean, learning, you know, court speak is, I mean, there's the difference between a people and a person, you know, it's insane.
Okay.
And so it's like, I also got to a point in time where I saw all these things happening and I didn't understand why. How can they just shut people's businesses down?
Yeah.
How can they just do that? Well, they do that because you agreed to let them do that. Right?
By being a citizen?
Well, in terms of that, that's why you saw companies and restaurants go to PMAs, private management places. Like, so restaurants that wanted to stay open, like they just went private. So you had to have a membership there.
Yep.
And like, that was their workaround. So everything to not be touched in our system that's set up, you have to be private.
Okay.
So how do I put myself in the private? This is how you put yourself in the private.
Okay.
And so like, you know, like you know, and then like I started learning about like, you know, you think you own a house, but you really don't because you're going to pay taxes on that house. Like that's why you don't own a house.
And if you live in Kansas City or Jackson County, it might go up 300%.
Right. But also it's like, you know, you have to secure a land patent. You put it in your trust and then the trust owns the house.
Yeah. And,
you know, and that's private. And it's fascinating to learn about. And then like, as I got down, it's like, you know, I like having my rights and my freedoms because from my understanding is like, I didn't before.
And that's what I'm trying to understand, Jake, is what rights do you have that I don't?
Well, I mean, if you get pulled over, you have to pay a city ordinance violation pulled over. Look, you can still vote and I can't.
That was another question. You can't vote on any election.
I can't vote on any election, but also that's not my government either.
Wow.
So
like, that's not like, I don't pay their taxes. I don't care what they do with other people's money. Right? I'm part of the republic.
But all that stuff still affects you. in some fashion. So
Sure.
I understand you answered his question, but where does what you are, and I'm not arguing, I'm not saying that this is not true. I'm just saying, where does what you're doing or what you are or your status outweigh anybody else that isn't that?
I don't think it outweighs.
Or what's the benefit? What's the here's the scale and you're here and somebody else is over here that's a citizen.
Well, I mean, I think, if I ever have children, I'm not going to register with them in the state, so they could never come take my kids. They couldn't take my house. They couldn't take, anything. Because I don't own anything. Mm-hmm. It's all private. It's owned by this trust. So it's like, that's, I think ultimately it's a state of mind.
Okay.
I mean, and I think that's what it boils down to. And that's why I say it's not for everybody, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's like, I still feel like I contribute to society because I pay taxes on anything that I purchase.
Sure.
It's like, if you have any idea what they actually do with your federal taxes, go ask Ukraine. I mean, I don't know. It's like, I see a system that's set up through deception, and I don't want to be a part of it. And I think that ultimately, if it came down to
that was how you get your peace of mind out of it.
Yeah, so to speak. And also, I mean, where it started because I guess fear. It's fear that someone one day was going to show up at my door and say, you have to put this in your body. Mm-hmm. Right? If or we're going to do what we did to the people in Australia, or do to the people what they did in China, and lock them up in camps, because that shit really happened.
Right.
I mean, that did. I mean, whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
Right. It was a pretty scary time. I feel like 2020 is mostly now, like, when you look back and you're like, man, that was 3 years ago. Man, what were we doing 3 years ago? You think, man, that summer, especially that summer, right? Because you're coming out of all these things and our kid's going to go back to school and all these questions and things. And now it's kind of almost laughable because we feel like we're out of it and it's over and we got through it and we were all in it together and all the things, but like, there were some scary times. Like, there were some scary times.
Yeah.
I mean,
there really were.
They were testing the limits.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're testing the limits. Like, how far can we push it?
Let me ask this. What makes you think, I swear to you, Jake, I'm not trying to be controversial, but I'm just trying to play this role in my head. If somebody was really coming to my door and saying, you're getting the jab today, right?
Yeah.
And I said, screw you. I'm a statesman. I'm a nationalist.
5-star.
Yeah, I'm a 5-star general.
Said.
I got a 5-star passport.
Yeah, 5-star passport.
If they've got that much audacity to be there, you're telling me that, I'm screwed because I'm a U.S. citizen versus I'm a statesman. You can't touch me. And because they would legally have repercussions against them if they did do anything to you.
Correct. And
I guess what I'm saying is that you're so far down the rabbit hole with the government and there's so much control and power. Do they really care?
Well, you're always going to have your day in court, right? You're always going to have your day in court. So you have, and we're talking about complete hypotheticals. So
I know, but it's fun. It's fun, Jake. I'm sorry.
No, I get it. I get it. So my question, in that scenario would be okay, what's the penalty if I don't? What are you going to well, we're going to take you. Okay. Well, I guess that's what you're going to do.
Okay.
And then I have my house in order where eventually I'm going to have my moment where I'm cleared.
So your trust is in the judicial system then?
Yeah. I mean, so to speak, but it's my trust is in the process I've set up and the knowledge that I've acquired and what I understand. And it's maybe I'd be put in jail for a month. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't ever want to find out either.
Yeah, no, I know.
But the point
I really bring it all up because it's just incredibly entertaining to me.
Oh, I get it. And I've been
fascinating.
I've been sitting in that seat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I like it, but it's sitting in that seat caused me to just really invest time and energy into educating myself and why was this put in place and how does this exist and why weren't we taught this in high school and it's it exists because I know people that have done it and did it and that have won cases and had their cars put in impoundment that were owned by a trust and were awarded a lot of money because their car was impounded, private property, and you're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
Because when we register our car with the county, that belongs to the county and we have the privilege to drive their car.
Gotcha. That's
why they can seize it, because it's their car, because you registered it. You gave them the rights to it. That's why they hold the title until you have it all paid off. But it's like, they like register is a really, really bad word. I don't want to register anything. I mean, I just don't.
Yeah. Okay. So you said you don't have kids.
I do not.
But if you did have kids, or when you do have kids, however you want to say that, would you have them in public school?
No, absolutely not. I'm sorry. I would not. I wouldn't. Not today.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go to another place.
I'm so glad we didn't start with this topic.
Why did we start with this? Oh my gosh.
No. We wouldn't have gotten all the other stuff, right?
We've only got so much time. It's 3:45. Okay, so let me ask this then.
I'm on no time crunch.
I know, but she is. Okay, okay, so do I have to be a U.S. citizen then to have the privilege of the Second Amendment?
No, I mean, you don't, because you can register that firearm in your trust. And the trust owns that firearm.
And then you're still using it for protection or
I'm the beneficiary of that trust. Anything that's in that trust, Jacob Patrick Guiterrez is the beneficiary of that trust. I can use any of that.
So what's the trade-off for me being a citizen then, that I don't get to, or for you that you don't get to vote? Is that really the only trade-off?
I don't get to collect unemployment. I don't get a vote. And I will never tangibly see my Social Security. Right?
You might not anyway. So, I mean, that's kind of a wash.
Absolutely. But I do have access to that account.
Wow.
It means I can accrue debt within my name, and then I can assign that debt to that trust.
Okay.
Do you use cash?
I mean, I use cash, and I mean, what I'm in the process of setting up right now, as I mentioned, a DBA. I have secured it with the state of Minnesota, and now I. So
you live in Montana. You're doing business.
So the thing is,
I know
something is in Montana. Something's in Texas. He's a Kansas.
I was born in Kansas, and that's so. Whatever state you were born in, that's your.
I know people who set up residence in other states because then they don't have to pay the property taxes on their vehicles, or like they'll set up they literally will drive around a vehicle that's from Montana or South Dakota because then they don't have to pay personal property taxes.
Right. Absolutely, I get that, but that's not. I'm not trying to do any of that because all that would be set up in a private trust, So it's like I'm not paying taxes on that anyways because it's private.
Yeah,
it's privately owned.
Okay.
But to answer the question you're going about this, I have a DBA and then I go get a DBA account set up. And so that means a DBA can never be collected on by the IRS. Because I set up a DBA under my name, Jacob Patrick Guiterrez. And so when I went through this process, I took all the rights. And so what they do is they set up what's called a straw man account. And that's what you set up with the birth certificate. And that's what you reapply for it every time you agree to something, whether you register it, whether you register to vote, whether you go vote, and whether you get a driver's license. Every time, like, who reads that stuff in the small print? You just, did you read it when you got a driver's license? No, you just sign your name. You were turning over all your rights and are like within that structure. It's like, yep, I'm practicing commerce. I'm getting a driver's license. It's a commercial driver's license. It's like, and that's where you turn over all your rights and they become privileges now. Because, and once you do that, it's agreed upon, and they're just really deceiving you because no one reads any of that.
I think I read somewhere that if you became a statesman or a nationalist, then you were not allowed to be a Kansas Jayhawk. I know I read that somewhere. Pretty sure I saw that.
That's branded on my heart, man. They have fun taking that away.
I'm joking. Jake, we got to wrap this up, dude. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out here. But before we part, Let's again remind people how they can find you if they were looking for a life coach or someone who could seek your services. Maybe they just want to follow your content on Instagram, or maybe they want to
become a statesman.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's coaching.
I can point them in directions.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like, and that's
but you have a book coming out. It's ultimately where I was going to end with that.
I'm still working on the rewrites of the edit. And so I don't have I was having a lot of stress and pressure getting this done. And then I finally have just said, it's going to be done when it's done. So I don't have a date yet. I have the first.
You feel like you're close?
I mean, I have the first manuscript done. Okay. So I mean,
can we show it for the camera? If it
does it have a title?
It does.
Yes, it's the Samurai.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So this is what
this is like a movie.
This is what the manuscript looks like. So this is the book. You know,
Chiefs colors on purpose.
And again, if you're listening to this on Apple or any of the other podcast platforms, you can watch this on Spotify or YouTube. We did have a video hiccup earlier, but you can see it now.
Yeah.
See this portion.
So that's samuraiofsoul.com is where you can find
And is that what the cover of the book's going to look like?
That's what the cover of the book's
okay.
Like.
Who made that for you?
Did
you do it?
No, I didn't. I had it done by a very close friend, my partner.
Okay.
So she did it, and she's a graphic design artist. She's a woman of many talents.
Okay.
So
sweet.
So she designed that for me, and then.
So that doesn't look like as many papers as I thought. How big is this book?
I mean, I think it's over, I want to say 80,000 words. So I think it'll probably be around 250 pages ish.
So that's a fairly quick read then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's not exasperating, but also I'm trying to, I mean, the biggest challenge is saying more by having less words. Right.
Okay.
So that's what I'm really trying to button it up with that.
That's really cool, man.
samuraiofsoul.com. You can pre-register for it. And then you can find me if you're looking for any type of feedback. If you just have questions, whether, it be about nutrition, about, drugs and alcohol, health, if you're dealing with diabetes and it's out of control, I can lead you in some right directions. I have a 15-minute free scheduled call. I take calls all the time. And, if there's a good connection and you felt good about the call, then we can go in a coaching direction, or I can give you some resources for whatever you're dealing with. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now on top of the book. And that's Jake Guty on Instagram, Jake Guty on Twitter. If you need to email me, jake@samuraiofsoul.com, or you can find the email on the website. samuraiofsoul.com.
That is so cool, man. Well, hey, much love and respect, bro.
Hey,
after all the years that we've known each other, and and I know that was probably not the easiest decision in the world after so many years of being in radio to walk away from it.
No, it was tough. It still is, like after the KU won national championship.
You had to throw that in there, didn't you? I like how you slid that in there.
In the studio after that,
Thank you so much, buddy. Appreciate you coming out here.
Anytime.
Let's stay in touch.
Happy to.
All right. On behalf of Jillian, Gregg, Jake Guiterrez, I'm Ronnie Philips. That's episode 39 of the Papa Ron Podcast.
You've been listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, hit subscribe now on the podcast platform. Follow the Papa Ron Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And while you're there, like, comment, and share. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. Papa Ron Podcast. Papa Ron Podcast.